Bush Heritage acknowledges the traditional owners of the places in which this podcast was recorded and in which we live, work and play. We recognise the enduring relationships they have with their lands and waters and pay our deepest respects to elders past and present.
So you need a ladder, a kit, a net and the data sheet.
Okay.
And wool, you got yours, Rhiannon?
Check.
That's it. Well, we've got everything. And Jeff's got the ladder.
It is dawn on Wagyl, Kaip and southern Noongar country in the wheatbelt of Western Australia. The air is crisp with the first stirring of bird calls, marking a new day.
8 each. I think that's a good target for today.
A team of ecologists, volunteers and staff have arrived at a 389-hectare nature reserve called Kojonup. They are there to look for some very special animals. And to find them, they're going to have to climb some trees.
So we're going to try these to see if they will block the holes so the animals can't get out.
These researchers are looking for Phascogales, red-tailed Phascogales.
You could say, for people that know squirrels, they look a little bit like a squirrel, except they don't have the really big back legs.
Arboreal marsupials, so small they can fit in the palm of your hand, and so charismatic with big ears that poke out of their head like satellite dishes and a big-eyed look. They will melt your heart.
And they have a long brushy tail, and right at the base of the tail, it's a very beautiful rufous red colour. It's not bright red, but it's a nice rufusy red.
Known as kengor to Noongar people, they might not be as popular as kangaroos or koalas, but like other small mammals found across Australia, they are a fundamental part of our ecosystems. But this population we are looking for today is special for another reason. It hasn't always been here. Over 11 years ago, with the species in decline, a small group of red-tailed Phascogales were captured, bundled up carefully, and driven about 100 kilometres to their new home, Kojonup Reserve, in what would be the first wild-to-wild translocation for the species. Today, on Big Sky Country, a podcast by Bush Heritage Australia, we tell you their story.
Okay, there's no Phascogale in here, but there's a beautiful nest. So we've got feathers, leaves, alocasuarina needles. That's about it in here. And a little bit of alpaca wool.
That's Angela Sanders, an ecologist who has been working with Bush Heritage for over 15 years. She was there when the very first Phascogales were released.
So back in the 2010, when we were first thinking about this translocation, the Phascogales were present in less than 5% of their known range. So they had been found right across the southern Australia, right into Victoria, South Australia, through the deserts and right through the southwest WA and a little bit further north. But they disappeared from most of their range.
As is the case with most small to medium-sized mammals, the decline of red-tailed Phascogales coincided with the arrival of foxes and feral cats in Australia, coupled with widespread land clearing. Now, the wheatbelt of WA is the Phascogales' last remaining stronghold, but even there, less than 10% of native vegetation remains.
So the Department of Conservation in WA at the time were looking for areas where they could translocate red-tailed Phascogales to, secure their population. So at that stage, they were only found in a few wheatbelt reserves further north than to Kojonup, and they wanted to move them a little bit further south to get a little bit more rainfall in the areas and to move them because of, the threat of climate change.
Kojonup Reserve fit the bill perfectly. This small patch of remnant bushland is prime Phascogale habitat, being one of the largest protected areas of Wandoo woodlands in the region since Bush Heritage purchased the land in 1996.
Those trees are, I suppose, nature's boarding houses, and they have lots of hollows in them, they have lots of loose bark, they have lots of dead limbs and lots of places for animals to live, not just vertebrates but also invertebrates. So there's a lot of food in those trees, and there are a lot of places for animals to hide.
Yeah. So in this nest we've got scats, we've got feathers, we've got leaves,
she oak and lichen.
And a fresh nest.
It's a fresh nest, yep. So if you come up and just put your fingers down into the nest, you'll see how deep and soft it is on the inside.
It took a while to get the translocation, project approved through Bush Heritage and through the department. And once it was approved, the animals were moved in May 2010, and then again more were moved in May 2011.
If you're wondering what a translocation is, in conservation terms, it is when a species' habitat or ecological material is moved from one location to another. To help them settle in, an initial 20 nest boxes were erected in the woodlands.
So we'd let them go in at dusk, and we'd put them in the boxes, and then they would we'd leave them alone, and then they would find their own way out and find other individuals, and they'd get to know each other that way. It was a good way of doing it rather than just letting them go into the environment without having anywhere secure for them to, to hide if they were attacked by predators.
As the population grew and the animals spread out, the team installed more nest boxes, and now there are over 60. Every year, they go out to check those boxes and monitor the population. And every year, they learn a little bit more about them, like some of the peculiar items that feature on their menu.
And often you don't see them because they're in their nest. But this particular box had nothing else in it but a half-eaten frog. And this was a big frog. It would fit in the palm of a hand. And what had happened is the phascogale had caught the frog, carried it up the tree and pushed it into the small, 30 millimetre diameter hole, and it had eaten the frog's head and one of its legs and left it there.
But one of the most peculiar things about the phascogales, their mating habits.
The males, So the reason that we only do the surveys in May, June every year is that they've got a fairly regular sort of breeding cycle. And what happens is the males only live for about 11 months and they've got a fast and furious life.
So fast and furious that at 9 months old, they embark on a deadly mission to mate with as many females as they can.
And then very soon after that, they die from stress-related, breakdown of their body.
Yes, we are talking about 2 months of non-stop sex.
It's been called suicidal mating because males basically just have one breeding season in their life and they're all into it. That's Bush Heritage ecologist Dr. Michelle Hall, who works closely with Angela. Females can live for a bit longer. So we've recaptured females, a year later that are still around, so they can live for longer and maybe breed for 2 seasons in their life. But yeah, it's a pretty unusual mating system, and especially for a mammal.
We think it's because they're living in a fairly, limited resource habitat, that having the males around for 2 or 3 years is going to, take up a lot of resources. So they've evolved not to survive, in fact.
So there's a lot of sex and a lot of death, which seems counterproductive. So what does it mean for the survival of their species?
So a female can produce 8 young a year. So she has 8 nipples. There's generally 8 babies attached after the birth.
That's research associate Dr. Tony Friend, who until recently was a principal research scientist with the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions in WA, the group who first proposed the translocation. Tony selected the phascogale source sites for the Kojonup translocation and helped move the animals in 2010. Oh, and those babies he mentioned? They can be as small as a tic-tac.
In a good year, when there's lots of food everywhere, say there's been, lots of rain and lots of seeding and flowering and lots of insects for the phascogales to eat, a lot of those young will survive. And where there were 2 phascogales, suddenly there's 9 phascogales.
But what happens in a bad year?
On the sort of downside, I guess it means that for a period every year there are no males in the population. If you get a really bad year, say there's no food around, it's possible that the population would die out. And I guess it also makes you think about how cheap life is in that scenario. Lots of young are produced just so that few get through.
This means that from year to year there can be huge fluctuations in phascogale populations. So to really understand how they are tracking, you need to be able to monitor the population over decades, not years.
Why are you wanting to be able to know which individual they are?
Well, because if we come back in May, it's really interesting to see where they are, so where we recatch them.
Yeah.
And survival data as well.
Yeah. And it might give us an idea we might be able to do something with population size, maybe.
Yep.
Because it's like marked recapture.
Yeah.
Now, more than a decade on, the Kojonup population is thriving and even expanding onto neighbouring properties. But to ensure its survival long-term, genetic diversity is going to be key.
So we've got tissue from the original animals that were translocated in 2010 and 2011, and that's been stored. And what we're doing now is collecting more tissue to have a look at how many of the foundation animals are represented genetically in the animals that are on the reserve at the moment.
They are hoping that the DNA will be varied and that they will have a strong genetic pool.
If that's not the case, if we're finding that the animals that are there now are only related to one or two or three or four of the original individuals, we'll be looking at another translocation to increase the gene pool of that population at Kojonup.
This is important, say, if a disease goes through the population. If all the animals have the same genetic makeup, then they are all going to be equally susceptible to the disease. But if there is enough genetic diversity, then hopefully some of those animals will survive and the population won't be wiped out.
I suppose through the whole process I've learned that it takes time, it needs good planning, and it certainly needs monitoring. And you need to go back and find out, what's happening and be able to respond to anything untoward that you're finding. So it's really, really not about moving animals and then walking away.
So clearly there's a lot of thought, research and work that goes into keeping this population stable. And it raises some bigger questions around the value and ethics of translocations more broadly.
I've seen a lot of translocations done where animals have just been moved into areas where there's already a local population of a certain animal. And of course they will fight and they're territorial, and we have no real knowledge of if those animals have survived or which ones have survived and how the animals that have already were in place, how they've survived.
And of course, one of the things is that you may be putting some of those animals at risk. So that's, I guess, it's a matter of stating that and weighing it up against other risks, like if you don't do it, for instance. I guess the really pertinent point here in my life experience has been with the Gilbert's potteroo, which was rediscovered in 1994, only one population, and that's all that was left, about 30 animals. We tried for a long time breeding them in captivity, but in the end put some on an island, which they hadn't been recorded on before. Turned out that whole island, Bald Island, was fabulous for the potteroos, and that population rose to be the largest population of about 70 animals. We also put them into a fenced area on the mainland, about 35 animals.
In 2015, a lightning strike started a bushfire at the original site where the Gilbert's potteroos were rediscovered in 1994, wiping out that population. If Tony and his team hadn't successfully carried out those 2 translocations, the Gilbert's potteroo might not exist today.
That's the risk. I think you see there's a risk of not doing anything, of just perhaps being so timid and not wanting to put any animals at risk that you lose your whole species.
On the flip side, there's also the risk that we pin too much on translocations without addressing the bigger issues.
So I think sometimes we can appease our sense of guilt or our wanting to do something and help because an area is going to be cleared of vegetation, so let's move some of the animals. And it is, I think we need to get to the stage where when we make these decisions to clear a patch of native vegetation, we need to face up to the fact that thousands of animals are going to die, and that's what's going to happen. That's the truth of it.
Yeah, I mean, translocation is really, it's not the last resort, but it's really only done for species that are really in extreme circumstances.
So translocating just a few bandicoots or possums or whatever is not the answer. And I think we need to look at the bigger picture and, look at why are we still clearing native vegetation in Australia? That's my biggest question. We just should not be doing any more clearing. When you look at the satellite images of the more arable areas of Australia, just about all of it is cleared of its native vegetation. So, by looking after these small remnants, we're just holding back the tide, really, because there's still a lot of ongoing effects that we see from that fragmentation that still haven't fully played out.
We've caused this situation, so in my mind, it's our duty to actually ameliorate it and try and stop the loss. Because, if you look at the wheatbelt from space, there's not many trees left there, not much bush, and that's really put most of the wildlife into a very perilous situation.
And, of course, aside from clearing, there's another big issue facing species like the red-tailed Phascogale: climate change. Modelling shows that the wheatbelt region is likely to experience lower rainfall, hotter, drier conditions, and more frequent and severe bushfires.
I think climate change is going to be the biggest threat to them. So when the woodlands start to decline, which has been happening right across Australia, so that's going to have a big impact on them.
Aside from losing their homes, isolated populations such as this are also at risk of being wiped out by bushfires, as Tony's story about the Gilbert's Potteroo demonstrates. Though thankfully there's a lot of people actively managing Kojonup and the surrounding area to keep the fires at bay.
That certainly would have a catastrophic effect on the red-tailed Phascogales, but we're well aware of that, and we've got all that in our fire planning is to do what we can to keep catastrophic wildfire out of that reserve.
So, for now, the red-tailed Phascogales are safe at Kojonup, thanks to people like Angela, Michelle and Tony, and the many people who have supported their journey along the way. And while some uncertainty remains, the future is looking bright, with a solid plan in place to keep these adorable marsupials safe in their trees.
We've got a closed trap.
They're still there, and they're still in other parts of the wheatbelt too. So it's, it's as bright as it can be in the face of climate change and fragmentation. It's not all good news, but it's we're aware of what's going on and we can do something about it. That's the main thing.
Big Sky Country is a podcast by Bush Heritage Australia, a conservation not-for-profit that buys and manages land and partners with Aboriginal people to protect our irreplaceable landscapes and magnificent native species forever. To learn more about our work, follow us on social media or sign up to our newsletter via the link in the show notes. Special thanks to Angela, Tony and Michelle for their contributions, Nick Duncan for recording audio on the ground in WA, and donors Peter and Maxine Wilshaw, who funded the genetics project at Kojonup. This episode was produced by Amelia, Caddy and myself, Eliza Herbert, with advice from Liz Keane. The theme music is Invertebrate City by the Orb Weavers, and audio was mixed and mastered by Mitch Ansell.